Welcome everyone. Very nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us for today's event, which is called Considering Access in Your Work. My name is Antonia Beck and I am the Senior Producer for Artist Development at the Lowry in Salford, and the Lowry are one of the founding members of the GM Artist Hub, who is presenting this event today. Just to tell you a little bit about the GM Artist Hub, if you haven't connected with us before, the GM Artist Hub, which stands for Greater Manchester Artist Hub, is a network of 15 organisations based across Greater Manchester, who all have a commitment to supporting the development of artists, particularly in our region. The network is made up of organisations that are venue-based and some that aren't venue-based, working mainly across the performing arts and supporting the development of live performance work. We came together back in 2020 in response to the global pandemic, pooling the resources that we had available at the time to support independent artists who obviously going through a very difficult time. And since then, we've continued as a network and as a hub, continuing to support artists. And at the moment, we are running online events such as this. And we also offer free one-to-one 30-minute advisory sessions, which artists can sign up to as well. Those sessions are run by a member of staff from one of the hub organisations, and you can go onto our website and book for one of those sessions and have a chat with any of us who are part of the hub. And our website has just been put in the chat, gm-artisthub.co.uk. So today I'm really delighted that we are joined by an absolutely brilliant panel of artists and creatives who are going to talk about considering access in your work. To briefly introduce our panel, we are joined by Alice Christina-Corrigan. Alice is a visually impaired and neurodivergent actor, theatre maker and access consultant based in Manchester. Vijay Patel is a performance artist, writer and neurodivergent access consultant. Sarah Emmott is co-creative director of Art with Heart, and Art with Heart are an award-winning Salford-based arts company that designs and delivers performances, workshops and people-led creative projects for community groups, arts organisations and schools across the UK. And Kate Fox, who is chairing our event today, who is Access Manager at Factory International, and I'll give a little bit more of intro to Kate in a moment. Just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and talking about the format. The event is running until we've set it to run until about 3:30. We might finish earlier, which is absolutely fine, depending on questions from our audiences. But that's the time that we've advertised. We're going to start the session with four presentations from Kate and our panel talking about their work. We're then going to have a 15-minute break and come back where we'll open up for questions and have more of an open conversation. If you're happy to put your pronouns in your name, that's really helpful. I use she, her pronouns. I realise as well, apologies, that I wanted to do an audio description of myself. So I am a white woman with long blonde hair that's currently tied in a ponytail. I've got blue eyes, wearing glasses, and I have a pink t-shirt on and a white cardigan. And we've got the schedule in the break as well. Today, the first half of our event is being BSL interpreted by Lizzie. And you can pin Lizzie's window by holding your mouse, hovering it above in the right-hand corner of Lizzie's screen, where there are 3 dots, and then pressing pin, and that will pin Lizzie. We also activated automated captions, and you can turn those on by press at the bottom of the screen. There's a button called Show Captions, and you click on that, and then the captions come up, and you can also view the full transcript as well. And just also say that we are recording this event, and it will be posted on our website afterwards if you want to watch the event back at all, or if anyone else who isn't here today would like to see it. If you have any technical issues at all, my colleague John, with name John GM Artist Hub, is available to help with any tech support, and please send John a message, and he'll do what he can to help. And just to also say that myself and my other colleague Zoe from the GM Artist Hub are also here to help if you need any support as well. So I think we are ready to start then. Just to introduce our chair for the event, I'm very, very pleased to introduce Kate Fox, who is Access Manager at Factory International. Kate's been with Manchester International Festival / Factory International since 2018, and they lead on embedding accessibility and access first thinking in all areas of the organisation, as well as overseeing the delivery of access provision on the ground at Manchester International Festival and in planning for Factory International, which is the new cultural space currently being built in the heart of Manchester. Kate came to Factory International from the BBC and has a background in third sector and public sector organisations as a digital producer, trainer and board member. So I'm going to hand over to Kate. Thank you, Kate.
Hello, everybody. Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. My name is Kate. As Antonia said, I use they, them pronouns. I'm a white person, got short dark hair and very round black glasses, and a headset on, and I'm wearing a turquoise and black jumper that I realise now that I'm on Zoom resembles a bit of like a lava lamp kind of pattern, and perhaps it's a little bit too much for Zoom, but here we are. It's keeping me warm. Before we hand over to our wonderful panelists today, Antonia just asked me to say a little bit about my role at Factory International and kind of how that connects into the theme of the session. So as Antonia said in her lovely introduction, I've been with Factory International, or MIF as it was at the time, since 2018. And I came into the organisation on a fixed term contract, very much as part of the 2019 festival cycle. It was the first time that the organisation had a role dedicated to access. They kind of created it after the 2017 festival. It was felt that we needed like a bit more of a joined up approach to access across the festival. And when I first started in that fixed term role, I think the sort of scope of my role was really around making the workflow of adding access provision really to shows that had already been made after they'd been made smoother, more consistent, and thereby enable the organisation to sort of deliver a larger, more consistent offer of accessible performance across the festival programme. And that was kind of where the organisation was at in its access journey at the time. And across the organisation for me, sort of when I arrived, that looked a lot of that looked like really raising awareness among the workforce about access as a concept and about the practicalities of delivering good access, building people's knowledge and confidence, particularly among our producing team, around accessible performance and kind of demystifying some of it. But then also really trying to embed thinking about access first and early and kind of spark some ambition around that. And I think honestly, if I'd sort of walked away at the end of that fixed term contract, everybody was quite happy. But I kind of had bigger ambitions for the role and really felt that work around having the organisation think about access, not only first in the creative process and having bigger ambitions around that, but actually first in whatever part of the organisation you're in. And we're getting to be a really, really large organisation these days. And whatever project you're working on, we kind of encourage everyone at Factory International to think about access first and all the way through creating work. So kind of following that festival cycle between the start of lockdown in 2020 and now, my role's become a lot more strategic in the organisation. It's a lot more sort of focused on leading that change and kind of encouraging the embedding of access at every stage across not just our creative projects, but everything that we do. So as well as working really closely with our producing team, I spend a lot of time with our HR team looking at our workforce and our recruitment processes. I sit actually inside our venue operations team who are looking towards the opening of Factory International, our new building in the summer of 2023, and really just advise on access across the entire organisation. I never really know what I'm walking into in the morning. It could be any question that would come across my screen in the course of the day. So I think now, as compared to 2018, my ambitions for Factory International are that accessible performance is really part of our business as usual, which I think it is now, but it's also a key part of the commissioning process and the questions we're asking at that stage. That we're developing a methodology for starting conversations about access much earlier in our relationships with artists. So we're kind of looking to create like a pipeline right from R&D onwards and talent development onwards, and looking at the creative opportunities of access much more explicitly in that process. So we've kind of developed this concept of an access innovation project, which is where we can do something more exciting, more embedded, and much earlier in the process, and put some real resource behind that to support people to explore it. On the sort of more operational side, I've been doing a piece of work around identifying access leads in lots of different areas of the organisation, so that the delivery of what we do can get a little bit more spread out. Because I'm just one person who sometimes has limits. And also keep working to increase the representation of disabled people as lead artists in our creative teams, as performers, in our workforce, and in our governance structures. And one of the ways that we've done that, particularly with regard to the new building, is we've got a wonderful group of consultants that have been working with us right from the start of the capital build, our disabled people's engagement group. And I was very happy to see a member of that group log on this afternoon, I should say. So it's really nice to have a friendly face in DPAG, because they've been a really crucial part of my journey over the last few years. So just kind of, I wanted to reflect slightly on my role, which is perhaps different from some of the speakers that we've got on our panel. I'm sitting in what is now quite a huge organisation compared to the one that I came into 5 years ago. We're in a position of huge privilege that Factory International has created this role, has taken that step and kept it going as a permanent position in the company. I think that kind of shows the commitment that the leadership of our organisation has kind of made to access, and having me around has kind of created very clear attitude change within the organisation. And that idea of access being part of our business as usual, I think, really wasn't there 5 years ago, but is there through every part of the organisation today. As I said, one of the really big focuses of my role has been how we have the conversation with artists about embedding access in their work and using access creatively as early as we possibly can. So how we create that sort of pipeline of work that's engaged with access as a creative concept, and how we support that. And in that regard, I think possibly compared to the experiences of the people on our panel, I really feel the thing of being in a huge organisation. It feels like the old adage of trying to change direction in an ocean liner sometimes. And I sort of look at having more opportunities to play with access and get creative. That's really where I want to take the organisation. I think often, particularly if you're inside a really large organisation, the sheer pace of delivery sometimes means that that creative opportunity gets a little bit lost, or is the first thing to get lost. And that's where we're trying to create a change. So it's definitely not been a given over the last 5 years that the projects that are coming into our curatorial group have already considered access in any way, particularly as a creative opportunity. So we're trying to really consciously scaffold that into our process. and encourage everyone to explore doing that. It's been really important with that to make sure that people with lived experience of disability are in the room, and to make sure that disabled artists are being given commissions in our organisation, but not always expected to be the people that are going to be thinking about access or using access in their work particularly. It's how we sort of spread that across the whole programme. Something that I think might be relevant to this conversation later on as well is the ways that I have sort of navigated when to use my own lived experience and when not to in this work, and how to do that in a safe way. So that's something that I'm interested to explore with the panel members later on, perhaps. But mostly, I'm just really looking forward to hearing from today's speakers, Alice, Vijay and Sarah, about how they all work creatively with access, and digging into some of the practicalities of how they've made that happen and how they've made that work for them. So without further ado, we're going to hand over to the first panellist, which is Alice. If you're ready to go, Alice.
Hiya.
Good stuff. Over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's great to hear about your work. And hi, everyone. My name is Alice Christina-Corrigan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman in my 20s with blonde hair that is like a bob kind of growing out. So it's like at my collarbone, half up, half down. And I've got blue eyes, and I wear, listen, I really can't explain what shape these glasses are. They are like a stretched out square, oddly shaped, and I'm wearing a green top in my mum's bedroom, which has white walls, and you can kind of see a bed. I'm trying to pretend to be professional, but can't get it out of shot, so we're just going to go with it. And I'm a working class, visually impaired and neurodivergent actor, theatre maker, access consultant who specialises in audio description and creative captioning, and a creative captioner. Basically, all-round jack of trades, many a hat creative, who fundamentally is questioning, challenging, destroying and rebuilding the creative access narrative in theatre, making intersectional access changes within organisations and formulating affordable ways to break the financial barriers when creating creative access, with a keen focus on Northern disabled representation. Now, I really could sit here and talk about access across many forms. So from access riders to tailoring rehearsal rooms, the importance in online streaming to access training, but ultimately access, whether that's creative or logistic, should not be an afterthought, all of which are just as important questions that I really do hope that we continue to engage in. But today I'm going to be chatting and giving a brief look into my journey with creative access, which started from literally nothing, whilst hopefully shedding some light on its importance and how this work has the ability to change the discourse surrounding theatre forever. Bold statement, but dream big. See, I'm an artist passionate about incorporating multidisciplinary forms of art using technological devices, linguistics, sensory exploration and collaboration to demonstrate a new and bold way of viewing and approaching creative access in theatre from day dot. The biggest thing when talking about access is understanding that everyone, literally everyone, no matter how successful, new, experienced or intrigued we may be, we are all still learning and mistakes are bound to happen. Because juggling access and creative access can be quite a vulnerable thing. And I find that it puts you and your work in a position for instant critique, debates, yeses and nos, and that could be quite daunting, especially if you find yourself sitting outside of the disabled community, but wanting to become a better ally. And I just want to make it clear that when we're talking about creative access and implementing it into theatre, it really is an opportunity for you to be vulnerable and take risks, but you must continue to listen and learn and ask questions from the community that you are deciding to focus your work on. And my way into theatre was through the means of acting, which is still a massive aspect of my career, but I define myself now as far more than that, fighting against the pigeonhole mentality that is often intertwined within our perception of what our job must look like in the arts sector. So ultimately, no matter what kind of work I'm doing, I'm an all-round advocate for disability inclusivity in all art forms on and off stage. And this journey began with my one-person show Past Life, a show that questioned the normalization of sexual assault in relationships, whilst being accompanied by a dynamic sound score, creative captioning, animation, and rich audio descriptive text to show how I, working class disabled woman with literally no contacts in the arts, can, if given the opportunity, pave the way for others to change the discourse surrounding creative access in theatre for good. This show led me through a DYCP to further research and define my accessible storytelling practice, and has been performed at the Barbican Centre, which then debuted with a full-length run at Camden People's Theatre, produced in association with the Optican Theatre, before becoming part of Bloomsbury Festival in association with Extant, ahead of a national tour this spring, which starts on the 4th of May at the Lowry, if anyone's interested. I've worked as an audio description consultant for theatres such as Sheffield Theatres, directed BSL integrated work for Nottingham Playhouse, mentored other disabled creatives through Grey Eye, and as an actor, worked for companies such as the BBC, Everyman and Playhouse, 20 Stories High, Box of Tricks, and Birds of Paradise. Saying all of that makes me feel a lot of things, because personally, I suffered a lot with a really negative connotation attached to my disability identity when I was younger, which is a whole other conversation, and is something that luckily, due to finding this community, I've been able to work on. But I tell you this because it was a really integral step in my career and my development. In 2019, I used my MA thesis to question how to make theatre accessible for blind and deaf audiences. And I wanted to challenge the ideology centering around my own disability identity, whilst also creatively pushing myself in a new realm. I wanted to create a project that I single-handedly could take to venues and build on post-MA, but I had no budget, no connections, and honestly, no clue how much this would define my career. So this in turn meant that in the early days, I began by making my own copyright-free tracks and creative captionings, using free pieces of software I had accessible to me, watching YouTube videos step by step, and teaching myself these incredibly inaccessible formats of tech to work out how to incorporate my own sound design and creative captionings into production. And the access creation began with sound design, which is something that is so commonly used in mainstream theatre. Music is universally loved, but it is also a really key way for the VI, visually impaired and blind community, to connect with theatre. Nuance on stage is really difficult to tell, but a well thought out and explored sound score is a very exciting way a show can become so much more creatively accessible. When it comes to captions, frankly, I was clueless. Software such as QLab, which can queue a whole show, is a fantastic piece of software that I am only now beginning to explore because, well, it's not cheap, attainable, or even necessarily accessible. And my point here is, a few years ago, when I opened up my laptop, and just thought, okay, I'm going to make captions, there was no way in hell I was about to pay £12 a day to rent a system I had no clue about. Not only that, but I didn't even know what it was back then. Then it really was just me exploring and attempting to learn whilst the world shut down around us. And even now, the financial burden of using such creative things does create technical things, creates an elitism within the sector, an expectation that creative captioning must use this system. And we're often ridiculed for using other forms of tech to create creative captionings cheaply. To me, back then, and honestly still now, creative captioning seems to be a massive grey area. And I was truly, and still am, making it up as I went along to challenge myself and make my own captions using free software. Recently, I adapted the captions for Past Lives Tour onto QLab, but I challenged myself, accessibility-wise and financially, to do it all for the free standard version you can get of QLab, which I achieved somehow. But this, to me, is the beginning of a wider conversation about how we can train young and new disabled artists to use free software and, in turn, make the software more accessible, especially for the blind community. But despite how technical it becomes, picking colours that underpin scenes, using fonts that enhance a character's presence on stage, and questioning where and why captions appear in certain places on stage, and pushing those quote-unquote limitations to captions theatres often use, is one of, if not the most incredible parts. luck, graft, email after email all factor into why this is now possible for me. But what it does show is a need and a gap for creative access to be taken as creatively and as seriously as it should be. By taking risks within my own work, and often met with a lot of uncertainty on its success from others, it ultimately led me to being able to show how work can be accessible if the passion, creativity, and community are behind those decisions. Past life changed the discourse of my career. And as I now step into working with the Lowry on Fade, which is my next play, traditionally a two-hander which follows twin siblings as they come to terms with their mother's sudden death, I find myself in a fortunate position where I can now, of course, continue to push the technological framework of creative access, but now be able to hone in on a more mid-scale production for audiences who are used to a far more traditional theatre format, to stand and be heard and to utilise what I have learned and challenge myself by using a piece of text which doesn't naturally lend itself as openly to creative access as past life does. Continuing to break down the myths, the technological barriers, excuses, and ignorance, as I now begin to provide a clear, concise, and creative way mainstream theatre can adapt their work to be creatively accessible from day one, by using our voices and our work to show how vital this is, and to give some financial, creative, and production support that is given to every other aspect of theatre design. We will continue to have our voices heard by creating new and dynamic work in a very unapologetic form. But I want to finish with three key C's, as I've coined it, that I often refer back to when I'm talking about my work and approaching creative access within it. And the first is challenge. So continue to challenge your disability inclusivity ideology. Community, immerse yourself, your organisation and your colleagues in conversations with disabled creators, and fundamentally employ us to do the work that we often get asked to do for free. Communicate. Basically mess up and mess up some more, ask questions, educate yourself, communicate your concerns, your access needs, and continue to be an advocate for disabled people's rights. And ultimately, my last point really is that no one knows what they're doing. We are all making it up as we go along, but we're passionate, determined, and creative. And I'm really excited to see where this accessible journey kind of takes me and my work and the people that I continue to work with and bring our voices to the top. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Alice. That was wonderful. I loved your 3 C's. I think I've nailed messing up, but I'm not sure about the rest. We'll see. We're going to carry on with that. We can carry on with some of the threads in your presentation when we get to the questions later on. But next we are going to hear from Vijay, if you're ready to go, Vijay.
Yes, hello. Yeah, sorry, I'm just taken aback by both those presentations by you and Kate and Alice. Lots to think about, and also lots I was like echoing, nodding with, and agreeing with. Yeah, lots of synergy, I think, with how we work and how we work in our roles. But yeah, I'll get to that now. So my name is Vijay Patel. My pronouns are he or they. I'm a brown person with black hair, but there's only a little bit of the hair sticking out of my black baseball cap that I'm wearing backwards. I'm also wearing a Greggs hoodie, black hoodie. I realized I just started by saying Greggs, and now I'm just going to show you that it's got the Greggs logo on it. So that's why it's a Greggs hoodie. I'm sitting in a room which has mainly got white walls, a tube light in the center of the ceiling, and some like sort of dark brown cabinets on the back wall. So I'm a performance artist, a neurodivergent access consultant, and thinker in residence at Colchester Arts Centre. And I'm going to kind of go through each of those and talk a bit more about how sort of the full circle of working with access in all of those roles, how they kind of come full circle. I'm an autistic person, so I will often speak in a very monotone way. There's occasional inflection, but I can't control it. But that's usually how most of my delivery will be. And if I kind of stop, I'll be checking notes and sort of looking left to right to sort of check that that I know where I'm going next. So there might be occasional pauses as well. So I'm going to start with talking about as a performance artist and how my sort of journey as a performance artist has been, how kind of access has been sort of a journey within that as well. So I've been making work for around kind of 10 or so years now, post-graduating uni. I went to the University of Chichester. I make autobiographical political theatre shows which aim to uplift and advocate for marginalised communities, those that are not often heard in UK theatre. So most of my work takes a very intersectional approach with regards to different parts of my identity as a mixed British Asian person, as a queer person, as an autistic person, as a working class person. So there's quite a lot of intersections within all of my work, and I try to use different parts of my identities to talk about different areas. So the first show I made was called Pull the Trigger, which was a show about being a British Asian shopkeeper growing up, working in a shop with my family, like a corner shop, and also emerging as a queer artist at the time of making it. So looked at the kind of intersections between queerness and British Indian heritage, and the shop being the site to have those conversations, which is a very fun, I always think very fun sort of like first show post uni. It felt like the one that I was like, okay, this is like not my university final degree piece, but it's coming into the sector and learning about things. But and that kind of ran until, well, just before COVID. And then the second show was called Sometimes I Leave, which I made around 2018. Actually was commissioned by Word of Warning, Contact and Stun in sort of the spring of 2018, I believe, for Works Ahead. And we presented the first piece there. It was a live art solo show exploring the medicalisation of autism in society. So kind of the medical model of disability and what I grew up with and how people were talking around autism and sometimes still are. And the need for me to implement a more social model approach. And I think what happened here was this was the turning point between understanding that I was working against a lot of barriers in the industry. You know, there's lots of things that hadn't been addressed in my work and how I can make my work more accessible for me at that time, not just looking at how to make the work more accessible to wider audiences, but I wasn't even doing that for myself at the time. So that was a real turning point. And actually the time when I started using an access rider, so that was like the first moment that I made an access rider and started trialing that to work out its mechanisms, how it was going to work, you know, how firstly create one and how to then send it out to people. And currently I'm making a show, well, I've pretty much made a show with my younger sibling Jaden. It's called Brotherly Otherly Disorderly. It's a show by two autistic siblings, an access rider in the form of a neurodivergent pop concert, which explores sibling care, allyship, access, and how we can transform our disabling barriers into something better designed to communicate our support requirements. It's a very intersectional show, intergenerational show, I should say, sorry, because my younger brother is much younger than me, and we are looking at two very different perspectives of autism, and sometimes when we have conversations about it, this show was a very interesting show to write, and I'm really glad that we've managed to do it. There were so many times in the last 2-3 years where I thought it wasn't going to happen, but I'm really glad we've got here. Currently is on tour as well. We've just done a show in the University of Chichester in February. The next shows we've got coming up are at Norwich Arts Centre, which is next week on the 5th of April, and then Cambridge Junction on the 30th of April, which is part of I'm Here, Where Are You festival. The disability-led kind of cross-commission with Cambridge Junction. So throughout those 3 works, I've kind of grown in my knowledge of access for myself, and I think embedding that for myself as a performer and for my creative team, but then also in terms of making my work accessible to a wider range of audiences. So thinking about, you know, how to creatively implement BSL and creative captioning and all different access provisions where the rest space is, and letting people know that they can use a rest space. Relaxed performances and trialing that as well. And I think I was just thinking a lot about what Alice was saying about kind of the elitism of like the industry, and that these things that are kind of behind paywalls, and it really puts people off, I think, making their work accessible. Which brings me nicely onto Access Consultancy and the way I work with artists and companies and organizations. So Access Consultancy was something really that I kind of officially started doing in the pandemic, and it was something I started doing when all was lost in terms of putting on work. So it started really with the Freelance Task Force in 2020. And for those that aren't aware what the Freelance Task Force was, it was an initiative set up by Fuel Theatre in a kind of sort of May, June 2020, where 250 plus organisations signed on to sponsor a freelancer each. And each freelancer was then part of what was called the Freelance Task Force, which kind of ran for about, I think it was just the summer of 2020. And there was many people involved, obviously 250 plus people. You can imagine the Zooms, the size is 7 pages of 25 screens. And it was kind of set up to advocate for different, you know, better change, better working conditions in all different areas, you know, people looking at fair pay. And one of the things that I was just not picking up on for a while was where are the kind of subgroups for access, and talking about particularly neurodivergent access. I was, you know, just wondering, there was lots of things where I was like, so many things I want to, from an autistic perspective, really want to like sort of lead, you know, particularly making the Freelance Task Force run in an accessible way, but also how that translates to the wider sector. And what that resulted in was an open letter I wrote with an artist called Ray Young, who's a brilliant artist and great friend as well. And we kind of joined together to write what we just thought would be like an open letter, just to remind people in the industry, nothing more, but just to say, don't forget about us. You know, it's almost that, and it's almost that signing on to saying we commit to doing better, not giving you the X, Y, and Z. We can solve all your issues, because we can't, not in the length of time of the Freelance Task Force, and not as 2 people. We can just allow you, I guess, space to sign on to something to say we're committed to doing better, basically, on the other side of wherever we were at that point of COVID. What this and then so after the Freelance Task Force, I applied for an Arts Council England Developing Your Creative Practice grant to just continue developing that and working with mentors, just to really shape what the role was. Also getting some neurodivergent coaching for the first time, which was great, just to help with that role, and someone who could shape that in an accessible way for me, which was brilliant. Yeah, so what that kind of looks like is kind of creative access work on theatre shows. So I can work kind of however people want on theatre projects and across them. Access consultancy for artists and companies, and this could just be about developing their ways of working and how they work together, how they work with their teams. Workshops and trainings on access riders. So I've kind of really developed something that breaks down the way that I wrote mine into kind of a workshop, which I run for companies, artists and organizations, and bespoke access work. So it could just be any other AOB access work. It could just be like one-off chats or anything that, I guess, yeah, the things that you know, like you say, Kate, the things that you know, you don't know what's going to come in on that day or what's going to pop in your screen. So those kind of things. And there's a lot more information on my website, and I've written a rate card as well, which I developed through my developing your creative practice, because I realized rate cards are really important, but I think really important when you're factoring in not just the access work that you're charging for, but potentially access costs that you'll need. So it's just really important to like actually break that down for people. And I also think there's maybe gaps, and I don't think this is a fault to anyone, we're all trying, but I think there's definitely gaps in terms of how much people are, you know, costing for access work, how much they're paying their access consultants, because I'm like, there's a lot of work involved, and actually this 200 quid isn't really going to go very far in terms of making your work accessible. You know, if you are writing an arts council, maybe, you know, consider making that a little bit higher, just because it's not going to cover it. I think it's also about, and I can't remember if it was Alice or Kate that was saying it, but it's also just bringing to mind that all of these things that I do in this work is really helpful when people have thought about it in advance, actually. I mean, not just for the sake of access, thinking about it at the start, but actually when it comes to things like budgets and when it comes to things like that, then you don't have the kind of pitfalls of going, oh, we didn't budget enough. It's really helpful actually to just have those chats in advance, I think. And the way I found it works really well is when people have those chats when they're writing fundraising bids and stuff like that, and they'll say, can we write you in for this, or, you know, can you give us like a rough quote or something. And it's something that I do in my kind of artistic practice as well. I try to make sure that I've had these chats before we put in bids as well, and something I really encourage other people to do when they're working with me as well, working with other access consultants as well, and just, yeah, having those chats about how it works really well for people. I mean, it might also touch in later when we talk about Arts Council stuff, but it will also help, you know, you can also put in access costs for the person as well, so that the access consultant has an access support worker or any access costs to do their work. It's things that I found very helpful and things that I've learned throughout the years as well. And finally, I'm just going to talk quickly about the Thinker in Residence work that I do at Colchester Arts Centre. Now, I didn't really know until quite recently what this role is, because it was something that was on paper for a very long time. And myself and Anthony Roberts at Colchester Arts Centre have been talking about doing this project for a very long time. And we got it off the ground kind of at the end of 2021, where this is something that where I can kind of collaborate long term with an organization. And we hope that it will be a model that we can put out eventually for other organizations should they wish to put a role like this out. But it's somebody just to be around to kind of think, I guess, about how the organization runs. It's really not something that is like there's so much pressure on it in terms of output, or there's no pressure, there's not, you know, loads of things happening in terms of me going, well, you have to, you know, have done all of these things and achieved all these things. Actually, just paid time to think, for someone to just come in and think, is actually a lot of work, and thinking doesn't get factored into costs and doesn't get factored into people's time quite often. And if you're a neurodivergent disabled person, having time and space, extra time and space, is really helpful. And it just allows me to work without much pressure, but having to just sort of achieve some things, you know, making the organization, we know that there's lots of things that the organization can do and things that can change around the building to make the building more accessible, or to make the way they work more accessible, or even introducing access riders into the team. These are some of the things that we have done in the last sort of 16 months, I would guess, something like that. 16 months is, you know, there's lots of training that's been done. I've brought in a lot of people from various lived experiences to come in and run training with the organization. At the very start of this work, I ran a session with the team on access riders, so there is now an implementation of access riders in the organization. They now ask for them, and they have templates and things like that, where if people are touring work here now, I feel passionate doing this work, because it means that there are other people that will benefit from this, loads of other people who bring their work to the Arts Centre. And it's now, I'm just trying to think if I've missed anything actually. So in the last sort of 16 months, I've worked with the organisation just sort of at Colchester Arts Centre, and based at the Arts Centre, to make the venue and the organisation, the team, more accessible, making sure that they can programme a variety of work, and programming more deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people in their main programmes as well. But in the next, since the MPO was released in November, I'm now going to continue on with the Arts Centre as a Thinker in Residence, but it's going to slightly change to a tendering focus, because tendering is where a lot of my family roots are, and it's a place I'm very, very passionate about. It's a place that is also very much lacking in arts engagement, and I'm very, very passionate about all of the people that live in those areas, that and trying to bring as much arts and culture to that area as possible. Huge challenge. It's probably going to take a very, very long time. We don't have set outcomes of it, but I'm a thinker in residence, so I'm going to be there thinking, not necessarily going on all of my, making sure I've kept all my promises and done all of the things I was supposed to. We're going to have to see, and it's very much an experiment to see how that works. But it's something that we've run a focus group with people in Jaywick and tendering areas, and it's very nice to be able to bring some of the terminologies that I've learned in the arts, like access riders and like things like that, to those areas to try and make them more sort of wider spread terminologies that people will be able to use in their lives. One of the things I've worked really hard on with the team for Brotherly Otherly Disorderly is to work on access riders for young people. So making sure that my co-performer and younger brother Jaden is looked after as much as I'm looked after, or more so, as a younger person, so that he has his own access rider and can advocate for his own needs. And I'm there to support that, and that we have an access team around him, so that there's lots and lots of safety nets there to support him in his growth. I think in summary, across all of my roles, there's a full circle of access and how I think about access and how my knowledge is growing. And I'm not an expert, I don't know everything, I'm not going to have the answers to absolutely everything, but I think there's many access consultants out there that I can absolutely say, between us all, I'm pretty sure we can make the world better, and we can dream big, and we can every day at a time, we can just try and fight the fight, keep going on. And I just want to continue developing, really. It's more of the same. I think there's a really exciting period now. I think I was losing hope a lot during the pandemic and during COVID, and I think I'm starting to get some hope back, that I'm starting to move forward in different ways. I don't work like I used to before COVID, and I don't think I should. I think I'm definitely moving forward in an accessible way. I have some contact information, socials and stuff, which I'm going to ask Lauren, my access support worker, to pop into the chat. But I'll also say it as well for just in case it's helpful for accessibility. My Instagram and Twitter is at Vijay Raj Patel 92. My access support worker email is the best place to first get in contact with me. So that's vijpatel.access@gmail.com. And my website is www.vijpateltheatre.co.uk. Also should mention, just lastly, I've just recently upgraded my website to a more accessible website. So if anyone wants to check that out, please do. There's not all the features are on there yet, but you can change the colors and the font sizes, and it's all been designed with access in mind. It's taken a long time, but do check it out if you're interested. And I'm going to stop talking now and hand over back to Kate. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Vijay. That was brilliant. I feel like I might not have a think. I just definitely need some time to think. What you said about your role as thinker in residence really made me think about how important it is to have space to think, whatever role you're doing. And I loved what you said about breaking budgets down. That being something that I've tried to do inside our organisation. It's been one of the most useful processes, just highlighting all the bits that go into making access. It's brilliant. I'm sure we'll pick up on some of the threads from your talk in the questions later on. And right now, we will hand over to the wonderful Sarah Emmott from Art with Heart.
Thanks. Wonderful. Hello, I am Sarah Emmott. I'm the creative director of Art with Heart. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white fat woman with short greying hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing round black glasses, a black jumper, and a big colourful necklace. And my sign name is Sarah. Before I start, I want to just say that I have ADHD, so my natural speed is really fast. I'm really conscious of it when I'm talking, but if I am going too fast and I need to slow down, just let the admins know and they'll kind of interrupt me. Just let them know in the chat and they'll kind of interrupt me. So, okay, access. Whoa! I mean, we've covered a lot, but access is just an absolutely massive, enormous topic. So as a writer, producer, performer, facilitator, consultant, like Alice was saying, doing all the jobs. Yeah, I'm going to try and give an overview of how I see it, and some top tips for kind of things as we go along. So as a company run by two creatives who regularly face barriers due to our identities, we're always thinking about access in our lives, but also in our work, for ourselves, for our fellow freelancers, for our participants, and for our audiences. So access should never, access should always be really embedded in your practice and never just an add-on. I know everyone said it, but that's because it's really important. So conversations about access really need to start at the very, very beginning of a project. So when you're starting with the idea, it really needs to be there at that point and continues through. So it also needs to have those people who are facing barriers with lived experience working on the project, like Vijay was saying, paid with you. And you really need to listen to those people and what they need. The aim, we see it, the aim is to always have people engage with an equal experience. So we look to build access in an equitable way. So in an equitable way means that we acknowledge that we don't all start with the same toolkit. Often when people talk about access, it's a means to an end. So people think about it as just getting bums on seats. But to us, access is not only about making everyone feel comfortable in the room, but making sure they have equal experience. And that often means that to do that, not everything we do can be fully accessible to everyone. And in terms of our access, Arts Council really want to see that their slogan used to be great art for all, and they really do want it to be for all. And it's clear from their Let's Create strategy that they really want art to be accessible for those people who feel that it really isn't for them. But they also want it to be considered just as it should be and not just an add-on, because just by adding it on because you think you're more likely to get funding is not the way. So when I'm saying not everything can be accessible to everyone, I wanted to give a really, really clear, specific example of that. So for example, in our recent toured production, theatre production Stan, we had a completely digital set with a CGI, so a generated image dinosaur, and creative captions. And at one point, we wanted the CGI dinosaur to come off the screen and for the lights and the sounds and the bass vibrations to create the atmosphere of the dinosaur moving around the back of the auditorium, so behind the seating bank. And this meant that it would be accessible equally for both deaf and hearing audiences, but potentially it'd be really difficult for autistic audience members and or those with anxiety. So we made this really clear at the point of booking that this was going to happen, and that there would be vibrations in the seat and really loud noise, flashing lights. So we made sure it was clear at the point of booking, that we had ear defenders for anyone who wanted them or needed them. We had available access packs, both online and at box office. I personally welcomed every single member of the audience in the foyer, and I made sure that anyone who needed that additional human layer of reassurance, I showed them into the space beforehand. We talked through clear cues of when the loud sounds and the flashing lights were going to happen, so that they knew exactly when to put their ear defenders on, and just to feel relaxed in that, so that their experience is equal. But for some, that won't have been enough. So for one of those examples is from my nephew. That's not enough, and they won't have booked on because the loud sounds, just the knowing that it's going to happen, makes it inaccessible for them. And so that meant for that one section of the performance that was really key in storytelling, and also making it equal experience for deaf and hearing audiences, made it inaccessible for others. So whilst we do everything that we can to prepare people, and also we have to admit that this one section of the performance just makes it inaccessible for some. But like I was saying, for some deaf children who could feel the isolated moving bass vibrations across the seating bank, meant for them that they had an equal experience to the hearing children who could pick up the isolated sounds that were happening in speakers across the room. So this meant that everyone was, both deaf and hearing children and audiences, were following the T-Rex around the space, and so no one missed anything. So access and audience development, they go hand in hand when you're making the work, but also building the audience. So building connections, relationship, trust, thinking about who is coming through the door, and why are they there? How did they get there, both physically and mentally? And access is really also important for the creative team as well. So audience participant and care for their well-being is important when thinking about access too. So how can you create an accessible project where access runs through the writing, the tech, the set design, the costumes, the producing, the rehearsal room, the tour schedule, the working day, the marketing, the press and PR, the everyday interactions as a team, participants, audiences and partners. So when we're thinking about access, we start with thinking about people who fall under the Equality Act 2010, their identities, but also we think about others who aren't included in that list but should be, and some are campaigning currently to be included, and we think about the barriers they face. So obviously in 10 minutes I can't explore every one of them, but I wanted to just give you the list to think about. So we think about age, those who are deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, care experienced, in terms of class, gender identity, long-term health conditions, parents and carers, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, those with visual impairments and young carers. And when I talk about barriers, I want to be really clear. So there are many different types of barriers, and there are intersectional ones too. So thinking about what barriers are in place, and obviously this is about working with a consultant to really pin that down. Is it something concrete, or is it a feeling or expectation? Because both are valid. So for example, I can't physically access the building versus I won't feel welcome in the space based on past experience. So yeah, if you want people from certain demographics, certain identities, if you want them in your audience, you want to work with them. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. It's just like the Ninos going past my house. So yeah, if you want them in your audience, you need to consult with them during development and reflect them in your creative team. So employ people for more than just consultancy, but actually to work as part of your creative team. So there's nothing about us without us. Make sure, for example, that they are from that group with lived experience. So for example, if you have a deaf character, always hire a deaf actor. And don't wait for a role to be written as a deaf character. See what deafness and gender and sexuality and race and disability add to those roles, or devise work with those people to consciously create something that is representative. And obviously, as we've all said, get people into consult too, and make sure there's a range. So it's not just one word on one person. So for example, one person's experience of being neurodivergent will be different for someone else's. So for each of those characteristics that I talked about before, there's a broad range of definitions. So for example, me and my nephew are both neurodivergent, but I have ADHD and he is autistic. And although there is some crossover in our access needs and some of the barriers we face, we experience the world in very different ways. So when having a consultant and offering feedback on the work or sharing, don't, make sure you are sharing with groups of people with different experiences and intersectional too. And yeah, as Vijay was saying, and Alice and Kate, don't expect people to work for nothing. Really value their time and their personal experience. And on that, access to work. So I just want to talk about money very quickly. So access to work, absolute nightmare. So if you're working with creatives who have an access to work budget, speak to them about what they already have, because you don't want to double up on provision or put their provision that they have at risk. In my experience, you usually end up in a weird time loop, because access to work need to confirm that someone has work, but you need the Arts Council England money to confirm that job, but you need the access to work money confirmed before you apply to Arts Council, because you don't, so blah, blah, blah. In essence, speak to people directly about what they need. And remember that there's two ways of applying for access costs. So say, for example, if you're applying for a National Lottery project grant, remember that there's personal access costs and project access costs. So personal access costs are related to the team. Is it for the team to do their job? What do they need in order to create their best work? For example, a PA, a scribe, an interpreter, something that and it isn't included in the application threshold. So for example, if you're applying for a project grant that's under 30k and the project access cost is 10k, you're still applying for an under 30k application because it isn't included in the total cost. And then the other is the project access cost, and that's in the main budget. So is this an access cost for audiences and participants to access the work? So for an interpreter or tickets or large text info, comfort documents, etc. So I realise I'm over, but unless you interrupt me, I'm going to crack on. So having conversations early on to decide access as a team works for everyone. It's like Vijay was saying, like it really does. So how can you ensure that people feel comfortable? So for example, set work days, set times, set breaks. Are you working from home? Are you working together? But there's the opportunity to wear headphones. How is the space laid out? Like all of us have said we're working class, right? And one of the things that we're really bad, I think it's a class thing, but it's also like a British thing, is that we're really bad to talk about money. So like talk to people about money from the offset. So like our expenses up front. How am I getting paid? Fortnightly fee payments, paying it, like how, when am I invoicing? When am I getting that money? Really allows people to feel comfortable in the space and do their best work. So access, you know, is also financial too. And those things are all beneficial for everyone, right? Because if you're not worried about money, it's just nice to know when you're getting paid, I imagine. I'm always worried about money. But so yeah, for example, flexible working hours don't just work for people who have children or those with long-term health diagnosis or disabilities. It's actually a great thing and we can all benefit from it. Because ultimately happy people make happy work. So what can start as an access need, once it's really embedded in your practice, can really make the working environment a lovely one for everyone. So yeah, when people work with us, we give them an access form, because not everyone has their own access rider or feels comfortable having written one to send you. So we send them an access form and we tell them to tell us what works for them, both personally, mentally, physically, financially, because essentially if we can make it work, we will, because we want everyone to do their best work and feel most comfortable when they are working with us. And also thinking about place. So place is key for many people. So that's not just logistically like city versus town, but also theatre versus library, and even theatre versus theatre, and what else is going on in that building, and how those audiences come together and take up space, and how they make each other feel comfortable or uncomfortable is kind of another more forward-thinking part of access. So I wanted to say more, but I'm way over time, which I said I wouldn't be, but I did it anyway because I'm naughty. So literally, final thoughts. So fighting your own internal learned prejudice is really important. Work with people within a group if you want to remove barriers for the provision at the developmental stages. Ask individuals what they need and know that you can't be everything to everyone, and you will make mistakes, but it's important to learn from them and keep trying to do better. The end, full stop.
That was great, Sarah, and don't worry, it was all gold, so you were good to carry on. I really loved what you said about or the insight that you gave about how you as a company work together, and also the really practical stuff around project grants and access to work, which is indeed a nightmare. I'm sure that some of that will be relevant to the questions later on. I think what we're going to do now, thanks to all of our panelists, that's been a really wonderful hour that we've spent. We're going to take a short break, 10 minutes, Antonia. Can you just...
That's right. So if we take 10 minutes now, come back at 20 past, and then we'll open up to questions and wider conversation.
And I think it's fine to put questions in the chat or raise a hand or wave at us. Any of those ways of putting a question will be welcomed.
Great, thanks, Kate. So we'll see everyone back in about 10 minutes.
I'll see you.
Great, welcome back everyone. And thank you so much again to our panel for such a brilliant start to the event. Just so much passion. I just like feel so energized by by everything that was shared. So thank you all for sharing so generously about the work that you're doing. So I'll hand back to you, Kate, then. And if anyone would like to ask any of our panel a question, please could you type that into the chat and start that with the word question so that we spot it, and then ask your question, and we'll put that to the panel. Yeah, question in caps. Thanks, John. All right, over to you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Antonia. To give you all a chance to put your questions into the chat, I think I will ask a question to start with and give you all a little bit of time to think. So apologies if I steal a question that someone else was going to ask. You'll have to think of a second one. I was just going to ask all of the panelists, but maybe starting with Vijay, if you're up for it. You talked a little bit about access riders and about the idea of making a creative piece that responds to that. I wondered what advice you've got for everyone in the room around using an access rider, what you found works for you as an artist, and also if there are organisations in the room, what organisations could do to help make that process smoother. Vijay, are you good to respond first? And then
no, I'm just trying to organise my thoughts. So
of course, take your time.
Take a second to like organise that. But yes, I may ask you to repeat part of the question.
Of course.
So in terms of access riders, so I started making one around 2018, and at that time I couldn't find a lot of other guidance or like templates or resources to be able to make one. And it's like that kind of like, as the person who's really in need of this, and I was at a point where I was like, I really need this, like, to just organize my work and just put in more support for myself, in and amongst not really having an awful lot of money to be able to pay people to do this work with me as well. I was like, it's kind of feels like it's all on me at the moment. I think what was helpful about that, although not so helpful for me because I went through a lot of labor in order to have to make that, but once I'd formatted the way that I made it, I kind of made that into a template in itself and workshop, and that I can make it in a way that other people can make their own access riders. But in a kind of short form, I can kind of talk through, a little bit about that. But what I kind of stepped through is exploring barriers. So, explore, and I think everyone who's spoken today has kind of touched on sort of disabling barriers and the differences of like physical barriers versus things that are like experienced environmentally or socially, or the different models of disability. We kind of go through all of those things in order to identify what those barriers are. So I think one of the hardest thing is actually, if you just ask a question like, what are your access requirements, sometimes people won't know what they are until they actually have identified what their barriers are. And so the step-by-step process is firstly identifying what the barriers are, then to identify what the access requirements are for those barriers, so that we can kind of formulate that into an access rider in itself. And so quite often people now sort of want me to see through the process of like from start to finish of making an access rider for a person or a group of people, and I'll step them through that process. And by the end of it, they'll have an access rider that works for them. We talk about form as well. We talk about what form an access rider should be in, because, I challenge the notion of like, it shouldn't just always be a document, because documents aren't always accessible to everyone. And actually, some people may communicate that in different ways. They might communicate their access requirements through a video format, or it might be video and sign language interpreted, or whatever that might be. We also explore that as well in there as well. So I think when you were talking about organizations, Unlimited, I should have said actually when I was talking about Brotherly Otherly Disorderly, my current work, where the first they commissioned it as part of the R&D Awards in 2021. And what that allowed is that this was a commission, not to make the show. I used this time actually to work with my younger brother in understanding in an accessible way what an access rider is, because a lot of people, you know, come to me and say, oh, it's very art specific terminology, and it is. It's very within the art sector. If you go outside of different sectors and you say what an access rider is, they may not know what you're talking about. So it's actually just about understanding that terminology and breaking that down in a different way for a younger person, someone who's not within the sector. My younger brother's a younger person. He's not sort of in this world, but I've kind of brought him into this world. But if I'm going to bring him into this world, he has to understand all the other things that come with that in terms of support and offering support to him. So one of the main focus points was actually just like workshopping with him, understanding what an access rider is, and to make one for himself, so that before even this show could even start writing or development, we were equipped with the fundamental is that the main two performers, lead performers, both have access riders, and they can be used within any creative process beyond that point. Yeah, and there's a lot of organizations like Unlimited and stuff that I would say definitely check out, because they have a lot of great resources that are like open as well for making access riders, guidance on that. There's a really great video actually on their website about animating the social model of disability. So it has a bit visual way of explaining what the social model of disability is. And all of these you can just find very easily through their website. Shape Arts is another one I would say definitely check out as well. Alexandrina Hemsley is a brilliant artist, has an open template for artists as well. I think if you just type in Alexandrina Hemsley access rider open template, it comes up, or something along those lines, it will come up. But there's more and more resources, I think, even if you just type in access rider templates, and it comes up with a load of different artists, organizations that have made these guidance. I also have guidance on my website as well. There's a video that I made, which is just a kind of video sign language interpreted video explaining basically what I just broke down about the kind of step-by-step making an access rider, exploring barriers, access requirements, form, so there's a bit of guidance there as well. So feel free to check that out, because it's just open to anyone. And yeah, was there anything else in your question that I kind of haven't really touched on?
No, that's great. That's great. You covered it, Vijay. There's a website called Access Docs for Artists that I'm a big fan of, because it's got a sort of repository of other people's access riders, which is sometimes good for
yeah.
But they don't call it riders, so sometimes it's harder to find.
Yeah, I think very much what I'm trying to do is to make access riders a little bit more kind of widespread, so that they, you know, don't just exist within the arts sector, but actually they can maybe go out into different sectors and people understand that terminology, and there's no barriers to language as well. And you know, the fact that only people in the arts should have access riders, I don't know, you know, this should be for my younger sibling who's, you know, 14 to be able to use at school, or, you know, it can be used for anyone.
Brilliant, thank you. Alice or Sarah, would either of you like to jump in on that question? Alice would like to.
Yeah, primarily because I think it ties in with Beth's question. Hi, Beth, in the Zoom, in the chat words. Access, I think, like, we touched upon a lot of like the importance of it, which is super. And I think my focus at the minute is similarly to not being just in the theatre world, is like it's for young people who are about to graduate uni. So I do a lot of work with them about their first steps of creating one, but also that the moment we make access riders not just for disabled people in the arts, the better response I think we'll get, because I really could go on about this for too long, but the annoyance of being the token one that has an access rider sometimes actually leads to far more of a negative environment than actually, this is where changing intersectional changes, kind of where I'm coming from that point, is actually the more we just make this a human thing, because humans naturally we're quite accommodating people for the most part anyway. And like, if we just all have our own access riders, it becomes more of just that inherent language that we're using into the rehearsal room, so that we as the disabled community feel far less ostracized for having to source one. And I guess the question Beth asked was about neurodivergent and working with access workers, so kind of ties in with the access rider, but I thought I'd just like touch on it now, because I really get what you're saying about like things that you kind of list as a neurodivergent person that you need in the room kind of sometimes may look a lot different, but asking for like an access support staff in like your access rider is brilliant. And actually I think the experience that I've had when we've had someone in the room, like the access support worker, which I think fundamentally should be there for a process in general, is that I found that I didn't realize I needed things until I had them in the space. So like, and there was no pressure on it. So like going for a quiet space, I'm not the kind of person that would instinctively go to do that, but whoever, like this person was fabulous, but like, I guess my thing there is like, I felt the less pressure to know what my access needs were, because that access support worker was there, coming for a chat, going to the quiet room, being handed like, you know, like the toys, the tactile, and you're just in a space with it and you're like, oh my god, I didn't realize that actually this would really help, instead of feeling like I needed to have the answers to what my access looked like. I found that just a very like interesting, and I felt like the mask that we all naturally kind of put on was lessened. So I think it's something that I'm going to add to my access rider, but I hope that answered your question. But I just say, the less I focus on what I needed and having someone in the space, the more I actually got from it, weirdly. But yeah.
Thank you, Alice. That's really good insight. Sarah, did you want to say something around that?
Yeah, I've written things down because I was like, oh no, I'm going to forget everything. So yeah, agree with what Alice said. Like, access riders are for everyone. We send them to every single person, and we ask for every single person to reply to them, because it crosses a band of stuff, and it means that, yeah, not one person's going, here's my access rider, and everyone goes, oh, well, what? Actually, I could have asked for some things, but I thought that was just a thing if you have like a diagnosis or whatever it is. So yeah, so for example, it could be, we frame it as what do you need to make your best work? So some of that is about a need, this is an absolute, and some of it is around preference. So for example, don't ask me any questions, don't come to me about anything 20 minutes before the performance starts. So that could be for me personally, because I can't, my brain can't cope with that. Or it could be someone else who's just like, I just need that chill out time. I just need to like be in my warm up and do my thing. Through to like, I need everyone on the team to be signed up for like anti-racist ideal kind of thought processes and action. I need, you know, XYZ from the team. We also make sure that we don't share people's like stuff because it's confidential, but we try and make sure that everyone is doing everything. So if one person doesn't want questions 20 minutes before, no one gets questions 20 minutes before. And then just we amend it to different environments. So depending on what sort of work you're doing. So for example, are you doing office work? Like what do you need to make your best work? Are you in a rehearsal room? What do you need from a rehearsal room? The tour, accommodation. And so there'll kind of be different drop down bits for different types of work you're doing, but it'll cover, yeah, mental, physical, financial, lots of different things. And then there's always a box at the end that says like, you know, anything else. And it's always updated, so it's never like a fixed thing. So it's not like at the start of the project you're like, I need this, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I actually think that this would really help. And you're like, sorry, you've done your access form now, sods, can't have it. And always making sure that there's one person that you can go and speak to about that. Yeah, the end.
Thank you, Sarah. Alice, did you have your virtual hand up?
Yes, I did. I just had one, I forgot to say this, but something that I've really realized recently, like when asking for people for access riders, is understanding that how personal they are, and it kind of taking away the pressure of requiring an access rider. So just the language, I think sometimes we really forget that some people's access riders are really personal to them, and if they choose to share it, they choose to share it, and sometimes we might not want to. So I like just work on the language when like I use on emails when I'm asking for access riders. That's it.
Thank you. That's a really good shout. Vijay.
Yeah, sorry, I also just wanted to riff off that actually, because that's brought up a really good point that I forgot to say as well. In terms of, you know, creating an access rider for a younger person, there's a lot of confidentiality and safeguarding elements to it as well. That is like, you know, about, you know, I can't as an adult, you know, advocate for that unless there's been certain safeguarding around that and confidentiality of like information that's going past. So there's lots of things. It's like really, really complicated, and it's taken many years to work out where I've gone, how am I going to be able to advocate for this person's needs, but also safeguard them, and lots of things. And that's why working with access consultants and a range of people is helpful, because it's only through that collaboration that you can actually achieve those things. And one final thought I would have is like, don't try and cut the costs by trying to solve all those things on your own. I'm not working with access consultants, because that can also do sometimes more harm than good. Is one of my other kind of tips to many organizations, I'd say, is just try and find the budget if you can to work with people, and rather than sort of bodging things up, as it were. I'll use another word.
Thank you, Vijay.
Can I just say one last thing? Yeah. It kind of links to what I was saying about money, about how we're not very good about doing it up front, right? Because if you have been in a space where you're used to talking about your access needs and you're used to doing that, then you're much more upfront about saying, hey, I'm working with you, here are my access things. But actually, if you're asking people to work with you, and do it for yourself, even if you're not working with other people, just as a person making work, like make one for yourself. But I think it be on you as the person asking other people to work with you, no matter what capacity it is, for it to be your responsibility to bring it up. Because it's a lot more difficult to go, I just like, at what point do I say to you, oh, by the way, like that, what you're doing is like, that wrecks my head. I can't, you know, that's much more difficult.
I think you're right, Sarah. And I know as a quite a big organisation now, we've also tried to sort of separate that conversation from other conversations going on around the work, so kind of away from the creative conversation, for example, ideally with a different person, but we're in a much bigger organisation. Vijay's point was actually quite a good segue into the next question, which comes from Cara. Thank you very much, Cara. And Cara's question is, I know we're all very passionate about embedding access, but I wondered, what do you feel is most frustrating still when you're working with institutions, and how do you manage that? Would anyone like to step in first on that question? Sarah was very enthusiastic with the hand there. Over to you.
This is a massive bug, but I could like yell about this for a really long time. But not having either just one point of contact that you're like, okay, I sent everything to this one person, they are going to disseminate it and get back to me within a time scale. So setting deadlines is really key, particularly for me. Like, send me deadlines for everything, because otherwise I'm either not going to do it because it will get fallen under a million things or I'll forget, or I just can't, like, time management wise. And again, that's for me, but that helps everyone, right? Everyone needs support with time management. But having to send with venues, having to send a million emails to a million different people because you just want to know one thing and it turns out that that is not the person, and then you've got to email someone brand new that you've never even spoken to before and be like, hey, I don't know how much you even know about me as an artist or a human being, but I need this. Like, that's really stressful. So either having that up front, so it's like, okay, if you want to talk about marketing, it's this person. You want to talk about this, and just having that initial introduction to those people is really key. So even as a small organization of like, we're just two people, it's just me and Rachel, but like, we're very clear of like, if you want to talk about these things, email me. If you want to talk about these things, email Rachel. Like, so it's really clear for people. And we always set up a Zoom at the beginning of a project or meeting in real life or whoever it is to say, hey, these are our faces, these are what we do, we're all in this together, like, so people feel comfortable. Because yeah, oh my God, a million email trails, horrendous.
I hear you, Sarah. Vijay, Alice.
Oh no, Vijay.
No, it's okay. You had your hand up. I was just going to say Vijay and Alice. Who would like to step in?
I didn't realise if we were both like.
It's an audio on the screen thing.
Terrible with Zoom still, and it's 3 years on. Lols. I mean, I won't go into everything because I think a big thing in the arts at the minute is sometimes there's a lot of negative, and a lot of why we're so passionate comes from a negative place. You know, ultimately we're trying to make a difference. And I think one of the difficulties actually is feeling like sometimes you are seen as that energy in the room, and that can be really taxing emotionally and like mentally when you spend all of your time advocating for the same thing. So I don't know if that's a weird segue, but like I think quite an important one is like it could just be really frustrating. And I think we're all really aware of how that can sometimes filter into our practice when we're being employed by people, which, to answer your question, it kind of links back to the ACE thing we kind of touched on earlier with ticking the box and being there for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. When you're on jobs as consultants, and you can tell when you're ticking a box, and you can tell when they've actually thought about it, and that comes to the budget. And there have been times where I'm like the audio description consultant, and no one even, I've got one day right before a tour goes on tour. A tour goes, you can read like it's not, I can't do anything. So when you're met with people who have been very successful in their ACE bid over people that are kind of doing it for the right reasons, that is a really not a nice environment to be in. But you're in a position there where you can still advocate for change. But I think it's really, really difficult to keep that positive mindset and really be fighting against, especially when we go into that consulting realm. I don't know if any of the other panel and anyone here kind of relate to there's a lot of responsibility that gets put on your shoulders when the consultant word is thrown in, which is absolutely fine. But when you haven't got the time and the budget to kind of really tailor that is a really frustrating thing. And it links in, I'm really good at these segues, to Ellen's question about when to bring in certain aspects of access. And I will scream from the top of the hill that, like, if you've got the budget and you're putting in bids, put in for any sort of access. So if we're talking, and I guess I'm putting a bit more of a creative hat on, but access support nonetheless, access support worker. Creatively, we're wanting captions in the production, babes, get them in for like a couple of days in that week and get the audio description consultant in, because nobody wants me coming in to the writer to say that needs to go, this needs to go, you need to change this when we're already at rehearsals. So it's really good actually that you're even asking this in the really early days. So fundamentally, if you're going to go for a budget, go big or go home. Like put the money in, and you can then like source that team and have those conversations. And I think that in turn actually answers one of the big frustrations that I for sure am feeling at the minute in this industry, where the money is being put in the right places and you're ticking a box, but it's okay. It's not okay. We're going to change it.
Thank you, Alice. I was just going to read Ellen's question in case anyone hasn't got access to it in the chat, because it's quite long. And then we'll see if Sarah or Vijay wanted to add anything to your brilliant thoughts on this. So this question from Ellen was about the developing an R&D Arts Council application. Both collaborators are neurodivergent and want to work with artists from groups that are underrepresented in the creative industries. So they've thought about access needs for the creative team in the budget and in the project plan, and access for workshops and surveys that will be part of it. It's at very, very early stages, so some of the work will be about identifying audience for the project and the creative shape of the project. So with that in mind, Ellen was asking if there's anything else that the rest of the panel might consider in terms of embedding access into the R&D for the project itself, or if it would come later on. And it's Alice's brilliantly outlined. Did you say go big or go home?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think but Sarah, Vijay, would either of you like to weigh in on that topic? Vijay.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to sort of break it up and sort of see what I can kind of give tips on. I guess you know, looking at kind of going down. I mean, obviously you talk about, you know, yourself and your collaborator being neurodivergent. So obviously there's some personal access costs to consider. And then, you know, that in itself will then free up more space to then be looking at other costs that you should be putting into your main budget outside of the, you know, with the personal access costs sitting outside. I think, I definitely think in terms of timescales, this is like a thing that you should definitely be thinking about, like early on, not later on down the line, because I think it's always harder. I think, yeah, across the board, I think all the panelists and Kate as well, we've all said it in some way where it's like, it always just needs to be at the beginning and threaded throughout. I think it's also just about, like, you know, figuring out if you do end up working with, you know, even for a few days with an access consultant in R&D, I think it's just about figuring out that, like, how often do you check in about access? Is it like weekly? Is it like every fortnight? Like, how often are you having those team check-ins? Are you having those team check-ins at the start of the day? I think like those mechanisms and developing that in an R&D is like really, really useful. And if I compare it to the R&D that we did in terms of like Unlimited, and obviously you don't replicate exactly what I did, you do your own projects and your own creative flow. But it is about that was about mechanisms, that was about figuring out how we're going to work together. How is it actually going to be possible for these two autistic people, intergenerational people, to get into a room together? And even there's a line in the show somewhere, which I'll just tell you, come and see the show, obviously, but which is like the hardest thing is just getting on this stage and being here in front of you. And I've never written a line where I was like, that one really hit me. And it really, whenever I say it, I'm like, I really mean it every single time. It really, you know, of all of them, that one really hits. Because it is. And I think for a lot of us, and I think, you know, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to speak for the other panelists, but it is one of the hardest things in terms of access and in terms of barriers we face. It's just being there, you know, with the same kind of equity in the room as everyone else, and having this, you know, the same amount of support and the provisions being available all the time and all of that. It's really hard. So I think, and I think also, I would just say also, like, don't be kind to yourself about it as well. You know, if you can't do everything in this R&D, don't worry about it. There's always going to be future times to embed things. I think open communication about what you can do at this point to yourself and to other people is good. To say, we can focus on this for this bit, and we can later on, we'll focus on this bit. And it always gives you room to grow, rather than trying to make everything, and I question the notion of fully accessible as a term anyway, all the time. I don't like it when people say, oh, this is fully accessible, this has got everything. I was like, I guarantee you I could look at it in like half an hour or less, and I will find you 4 or 5 pitfalls. Even more frustrating if that person hasn't got an access consultant and has done it themselves. But yeah, I think, yeah, be kind to yourself though. I think, you know, you're coming from a place of trying to figure all these things out for yourself. I think prioritize yourself, and it's okay to prioritize yourself first, making things work for you in the R&D process, and then looking at, you know, your work and creative access and how to make it more accessible to wider audiences.
Thank you, Vijay. Just before I bring you back in, Sarah, I just wanted to share what Porcelain had put in the chat in case folks can't see that, because she'd made a really useful point. So it doesn't seem to be widely known, but if your R&D or your work is on a particularly triggering or emotional topic, you can include therapy costs in your personal access costs so that you can go where you need to and keep yourself safe. So I just wanted to shout that out in case anyone hadn't been able to see it in the chat. But Sarah, sorry, over to you.
Well, this is good because this is in my things that I was writing.
Oh, we're segueing. This is good.
Yeah, so looking after yourself as artists, particularly if you're making like autobiographical work, particularly, but also just generally like artist care, looking after our well-being is really important. But then also that links to actually looking after your audiences and audience care, because often what happens is I go to things and I'm expected to process them in a bar around alcohol. And depending on what's happened in that space, that's really problematic for a lot of people. So sort of linking back to that, what else can we do in this R&D? I think often when we do R&D projects for there, we're really focused on the creative output, right? Because what are we making? But also, I always say, who are you making it for and why is it useful? Because if you're not thinking about your audience at the point in which you're making that creative work, then I don't know why you're doing it, because we could just do it in your front room and have a nice time, or you could just not have an audience and do it for yourself. Do you know what I mean? So really thinking about how people arrive, where they're at mentally, emotionally, physically, how they've got there, what is the journey there. So like in an R&D process, what we do is we'll think about the creative work, but we'll also think about the audience as part of that and what the process is for them. So the original question was like for underrepresented people, but I mean, that's like massively broad. So I'm not going to speak specifically because I don't know who you mean by that. So thinking about creative stuff, but also producer stuff. So like audience care, not just signposting, what is the process in which they enter the space? So like I was saying before about who else is in the building, what is their journey to the space? What is their journey out of the space, and where do they go to process that, and who are they with, and what is the surroundings, whether that's a specific space. So like when we toured Declaration, which is about my ADHD, we had a specific wellbeing room which had a trained professional in there, so it wasn't just like pamphlets, but it was actually a space, a curated space where people got to continue that processing post performance. Is it so part of audience development, like who are they, what are the barriers, how are you reaching them, why do they care about it? If you want them there, thinking tour booking as well, so like as part of the R&D, thinking about, well, where do we want this to turn up? So like I was talking about space, like is it a theatre, is it a library, is it in a town, is it in a city, what's people's journey to the place, how do they feel, how do they like feel about turning up physically? Like a lot of people will be like, oh my god, do we need to get dressed up? Be like, no, come as you are. Like we see it as a win. If someone turns it up in their football shirt, we've done our audience development job properly, because they feel comfortable to just come as they are. And looking at organisations that you can work with that are working, like charities or youth groups or whoever it is, who you're trying to make the work for, working with them in the R&D stage to get them in, say for example as a youth group, to come and watch a sharing and feedback on it, and sort of ask them questions about stuff like, okay, well what will make you feel more comfortable, about where it is, about what the journey is, about all of those things, and covering things like travel costs, tickets, and then is there wraparound activity, what is the marketing, what is the press, and consent is really key in that. So when you were saying, the person who asked the question said that they're two neurodivergent artists, and so thinking about what you want to share, like in press and PR, is really key, because sometimes people will be like, oh, Sarah's XYZ, and it's like, oh, actually, I don't necessarily feel safe in that space talking about that particular thing, or like answering direct questions, like is there a Q&A? Sometimes I'm not okay with that, sometimes I am. Like, so yeah, thinking about, there's a lot to think about in that R&D stage that's not just, this is what it is. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sarah. The next question, well, the next thing from the chat that has been passed on to me is slightly more of a call out. And it's from the person with the screen name of Debbie, but I think I remember that your actual name was Adam. I'm sorry if I've just both misnamed and misgendered you. You are Adam, you're putting your thumb up, that's great. So this is a bit more of a call out, and I think we wanted to invite folks to connect in the chat or by direct message while we're still together if you wanted to respond to this. But panelists, if there's anything you want to say in response to this, totally fine. Also wave at me. So Adam has asked, do any artists with access needs want to have conversations about potentially working together in the future? I fall very dramatically in the category of not having access needs, but want to make more accessible work. But the big chunk that's missing is working directly with artists that have access needs. So general bit of a call out for people who might want to connect with Adam, whose screen name is Debbie, Also, panelists, do any of you want to? Do you have anything you want to say back to that, or would you like me to move on to the next formal question?
I've actually been having email chats with Adam,
Oh.
just to be like really transparent about it. So yeah.
Excellent.
I guess all I would say is if you want to check out my website and if there's anything on the kind of rate card of like any things that I do offer in terms of working with exit, I guess just check that out and see if there's anything that kind of rings with any of the projects that you're working on.
Thank you, Vijay. Oh, sorry, go on, Alice.
No, everyone else talked, so I was like, I should probably say yes, but I said yes in the chat. So always.
Great stuff. Next up, we have a comment from Corinne, but do the panel have any suggestions around this? So Corinne has said, as an autistic person, I'm so used to masking that I have no idea what my access needs are. Even in a place where I would get what I need, I wouldn't know what it was or what to ask for, which I think you alluded to a little bit, Alice, in the example that you gave earlier. But does anyone have any comments that they wanted to make, sort of reflecting on Corinne's point?
Hi, Corinne. I'd say like maybe find like 20 minutes or something, or however long you want, to just sit with yourself and be like, what is it that the best projects I've worked on, like what was in the room, like what made that what it was? And that might help you pinpoint just for you what it is that you would benefit from. I think it's a really valid point. I think my access rider journey started off really basic and grew over time because it it really gives you an excuse to focus in on yourself and actually just ask yourself questions that I don't think we ask ourselves a lot. Like, what is it we need? So I guess my like tip would be just to like find a bit of time, if you want, and in whatever way works for you, formulate some sort of list or a mind map or just a voice note of what it was on those projects that you really enjoyed, and then from there formulate that into an access rider. I send out a template to people who are interested, so like I'm pretty sure people have touched upon that, but if that's if that's any help, then you can go from that point. But yeah, I would just say just give yourself some time to reflect on what it is that you enjoy in the best rooms you've been in. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Thank you, Alice. If folks are ready, Sarah, did you want to come in? Go for it.
Yeah, I just echo that. But I think sometimes you create a barrier, like I, speaking personally, create a barrier for yourself. So like, if I phrase it to myself as what do I need, sometimes I'm really good. On one day I'll be really good. I'll be like, this is what I need. And then on other days I'm like, oh, I don't know. Whereas if I preference it for myself, so like, what would I like Alice was saying, what have you liked, what have you enjoyed, what have you felt good about in other spaces? So if I phrase it to my own brain as like, what do I like? Actually, if I'm doing office work, I like to be on my own. I like to have really intense, I basically solidly work to the prodigy. I actually don't just want that, I need it. Like I've learned that I need it, but I've only learned that I need it through feeling like, oh, I can just crack on then. Great. Also then that springs through to, I don't really like it when people interrupt me when I'm in the flow of things, because I genuinely can't get back in it. So then that allows me to think, okay, well, how can I stop people interrupting me? And so I learned this from someone else. Having like a 1 minute. So like if I can feel someone there, I'll just be like 1 minute and I'll carry on doing what I'm doing, and then I'll take my headphones off, and that's when you know it's okay to speak to me. Or someone I know has a little sign that says like, it's okay to speak to me, and then they turn it around, it's like, it's not okay to speak to me, like come back soon. Come back when the sign's changed. So they'll like turn it around, and then people will be like, oh, now I know it's okay to ask questions. So it feels like it's not always as easy as going, this is my access need, that's how I get it. sometimes it's about going, okay, well, what do I like and what do I not like? And then it kind of links into asking for, actually, that sign is really vital if I'm in like an open plan office space, or I just cannot work in an open plan office space. So yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you, Sarah, that's brilliant. The next question is from Kat, who says, I know this isn't necessarily arts-based, but it's very, very relevant to the topic of the session. I actually have an exit meeting for a corporate job that I had, where they're going to ask me for more details about the reason that I left. And it was all about my access needs not being met, particularly having adjustments made on paper, but attitudes in the place being inaccessible. Can anyone help me with how I approach this meeting without losing my mind, my head, my temper?
I'll go. I think it's really important to protect yourself. And if you feel like that isn't an environment that is going to be good for you, I would argue, why, like, do you have to go in it? Do you have to put yourself in that situation? Can you just draft an email that says, actually, this is why? And that gives yourself more time and space to actually articulate yourself, and not feel pressured in that environment to like say everything you want to say, or potentially leave and go, oh, I wish I'd told them this. Like, there's actually, you're coining something in a really like fair way over a period of time and sending it, and actually that puts that on them, because the exit interview process is for an organization to learn. And if you don't feel like they're really going to listen to you, then it's just a tick box exercise, and maybe they'll learn something and maybe they won't. But actually, if you send it, then it's on them to do the work and not on you to do the emotional labor of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else want to weigh in on that, or are you good to move to the next question? We'll move on to the next question, I think. Everyone's happy. So we've got 2 questions left, I'm told. The first one being from Karen, again, I think, who says, I think a company having a sort of reverse access rider, for example, here's what we can offer, tick what you need, sort of thing, might be helpful. Is this a thing? I, being from an organisation, can say this is sort of a thing in our organisation. We've certainly found it over time really useful to give people specific ideas, examples that are specific to the type of work they'll be doing with us, of the types of things we can provide. Otherwise, we have a lot of people who say, oh, I don't know, I've never been asked that before, and I don't know what to ask for, exactly as we've discussed. But that's just my 2 penny worth, and I'm not a panelist, so I will throw this one open. Vijay.
Yeah, I think there's merit, and I do this in some of the work that I, some of the consultancy work, is that there's merit in saying, here are the access provisions that I can provide, as an artist or a company or whatever. That's going to vary depending on scale and depending on what funds and what resources people have available to them. But yeah, if we were working with an organization, you would, maybe assume that, if they have a rest space, then list that, and that could be one of the things that people tick. But yeah, having that clearly communicated is helpful in a way, particularly if someone's new to working with an access rider, or new to understanding their access requirements, or just still in a process of discovering, which we all are, and always changeable. So someone might have just realized that a rest space is useful to them. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's about exploring what terms you might call that, is like, here are the access provisions we have, or this is our accessibility policy as an artist or company, or anything like that, I guess. Yeah, but yeah, I think definitely that with other things is useful, and I think it's distinguishing that that's one thing, but also then that prefaces the other conversations around access, like, do you have an access rider? Is there any other way you would like to communicate your access requirements? All of those things. So I think it's like not all of it, but part of it.
Thanks, Vijay. It's a really useful summary. Alice.
This might be a slightly different note. So sorry if it is, basically. I like the tick box, you know, like being able to list everything that like someone can offer or tick next to the access requirements you need is kind of where I guess I'm segueing, because I think that fundamentally, for context, I produced an R&D a couple of weeks back, and what I did with the people I was employed and like used that week was, here is a access form you can just really like non-invasive like tick. Here is a document, a template, an access rider template you can fill in, or you can send me your personal one, or you can do none of the above, because it's offering those options. Not everyone has an access rider, and also sometimes it's really simple. So similar note, but I guess a bit different. But if anyone is like thinking what the best practice is, I guess touching base with different options and knowing like if someone in that room was like their native was deaf, then I would have like probably looked at a different form of doing that. So I guess it's just tailoring the options you're providing, creating really simple ways that people can provide their access, which I think leans into that, like having a form which is like, this is what we can offer, let us know what you need. But ultimately I think all of them, no matter kind of what route of access rider we're talking, have that option for someone to add any additional notes, because you will know yourselves more than the person sending the form, kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. That's really cool.
Yeah, I feel the same. My first response to like, I'm going to get a form that I have to tick a box about what I'm going to get, makes me immediately feel defensive about what you're going to offer, because I feel like what you're going to offer is not asking me what I need. It's telling me what you can provide. So I think if it was if certain things tick box, fine, but like as long as it's got lots of space for me to tell you what I need, then that's okay. Yeah, because it's always a conversation, right? Because I can send my access requirements, because also there can be like sort of friction between access needs, and you've got to find a middle ground. So for example, one example of this is, I don't want work on WhatsApp. Don't want you to text me about work, because it's in too many areas of my life. But there's some artists that I work with who are like, I really need to do voice notes because I need to hear the inflection in your voice. So I'm like, okay, well, I can make that adjustment where you are the only person I have on WhatsApp to talk about work, and everyone else has to do email. So it's like, actually you're constantly like, okay, well, how do we all fit together? Whereas I feel like a tick box is very much like, this is the box, you got to fit in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great. I don't know about you. I feel like there's kind of a distinction between sort of a tick box that is more, this is what will be in the room kind of for everybody, versus not saying you can only choose these things. I don't know. I think there's a bit of nuance there. We have a last question from Annie. It's quite a long question, so if you need me to break it up, we'll go back to it. Totally fine. Annie says, I'm interested to hear if any of the panel have experience of artists or others belatedly disclosing hidden or invisible disabilities and access needs. For those of us who not survived, repeatedly burnt ourselves out through masking and hiding access needs for years. It's a difficult conversation to start, especially with gatekeepers, when you've done all of the hidden labour and hidden the consequences for a long time. And Annie's loving the openness of the panel, which is tribute to all three of you, I think. So yeah, I suppose anything around starting conversations, experiences around not having that conversation early on. Go ahead, Alice, you have your real hand up.
I have my real, yeah, I've just using a mixture of the two, mix things up. I think, so forgive me if it is like not, I feel there's a lot in that question, which is fine. I'm going to use an example of like someone is in a rehearsal room, their access rider didn't state certain things, and it's kind of become a thing because it's a hidden disability, and, you know, kind of something like along those lines. from what I've taken from that question. And I think it comes back, and I'm actually surprised I haven't talked about this yet, but I think that comes back to training in either organizations, personal development, disabled awareness training, BSL and deaf awareness training, visual impairment training, those sort of things, in which, let's say a theatre has hired you, they're putting on the show and you're the director, that the people coming through these doors are being kind of trained alongside. This is me talking in an ideal world, right? Because ultimately the answer to that question is having the right people in the space to create a cohesive environment where conversations are ongoing. So I know when I'm running a space, I'm responsible for the access, and I'm responsible for the environment that I'm creating. And I bloody hope so, but the people that I've kind of worked for in that regard when I'm facilitating, the conversations are it's ongoing. I then find it difficult when you're in certain environments where, like, obviously you might be like the actor and not the person like producing it and things like that, which then makes it difficult. And you can really, I'm going on a tangent, but you can sometimes really tell the difference between who's in charge of rooms and who isn't, because it's the energy thing. And it actually, ultimately, that is absolutely fine and should be something that's encouraged, because we should be in open environments where we are able to have conversations if we want to have them. And ultimately, the only way forward for everyone to kind of get on the same page moving forward is the more training that we can kind of offer out, and representation, and it becoming a bigger and bigger thing within the sector, so that it isn't seen as a really sometimes quite detrimental area of the arts. I think I've made my point, maybe in a bit of a backwards way, but with the right people in the space, those conversations should be happening. And when the conversations aren't happening, ultimately it comes back to who we're employing and how we can create a education alongside the sector to kind of bring everyone up to speed generationally, and all of these things, so that people are made to feel comfortable. Because that's all it is, really, is like, the moment people are comfortable in the space, conversations can happen. I hope that answered some part of that question.
That was great, Alison. I think I took from that as well something around the conversation continuing throughout the process, which to a certain extent takes away that there's no too late to disclose, other than for your own discomfort or any labour that you've had to do. But yeah, at any moment, because those conversations never stop, they're not fixed in stone. Sarah or Vijay, do either of you like to speak to that question?
Can I just clarify the question in my head? So yes. It was about like when you've masked a lot and someone isn't like upfront about, yeah, okay. I feel like, I know if people don't talk about access right up front, I know it's gonna be a problem. So I try and find ways to bring it in. So like, if you're working with a really big organization, often they'll have like, it depends what capacity you're working with. Like they might have a what do they call them? A handbook. They might have a handbook and be like, oh, have you got a handbook I can have a look at? But like your organization and working with you, and then might be like, you know that you don't have an access section in your handbook, and that's really strange because most organizations your size do. That might start a conversation. Or I think it's always that thing of like, the onus is on you to start the conversation, and that's really hard. I've started doing things at the point of people asking me to do work. So people will say to me, do you want to run this thing, or do you want to do whatever? And I'll say, yeah, this is how much it costs. And that includes, and then I'll list what it includes, because a lot of that hidden work happens and people don't realize. So sometimes people would be like, oh God, I didn't know it would cost that much. And then I'd have to come back and go, oh, and it feels like I'm justifying why I'm charging what I'm charging. Whereas if I say from the outset, this is how much it costs, and these are the reasons why, if they then want to say to me, no, that's fine, whatever. It'd probably be really difficult working with you, or what, or just no, that's fine. People are allowed to say no. But most of the time people will reply saying, oh, actually, yeah, now you've laid it all out for me, makes perfect sense why it costs that much. Because they're not thinking in the same ways all of the time. And I think people are often doing things to budgets. So they're like, I just need you to do it for this amount of money. And it's this constant like push and pull between like, I need you to just do the things I need you to do within the constraints I've got. And artists having to say yes to that because we need money and we need to pay our rent. And the more that happens, the tougher that becomes. But we're individuals, right? And that's a tough thing. So, and the answer is we say no more, but then we also have to account for the fact that we've all got to pay our rent. So yeah, bigger problem.
That's great, Sarah. There's some really practical strategies in there. So Alice, you have your virtual hand up.
I've just changed back to virtual hand for whatever reason. That point, oh my God, ADHD, forgotten. The point about there's an art of saying no, right? And it's it was my New Year's resolution, like take like gravitas in saying no and standing by that and like holding down your worth, especially when it does come to pay, like, oh my goodness. But also being aware that and there's been instances where I might have said no to a job access wise, and then there's loads of questions that get asked back in an email, firstly in a really small font that is really hard for me to read, and two, ultimately morally I'm all up for talking about it. And it's that really weird grey area where when is it okay to be the educator and when is it stepping into, oh, am I just giving you consultation for free? Because we all are inclined to like want to have these conversations, but I think it's a really, really tricky ground. But I think there's the art of saying no is really, really hard to learn. But like, I think it's really, really important in that regard. It's a really eggy area. I definitely mess it up sometimes, but if you feel deep down that like someone is asking too much of you in terms of like your access knowledge, like I said in one of my C's is like pay the disabled people to do the work you very often ask us to do for free, right? So hold your ground because you know your limits and your boundaries are really important. And I think that's a really weird area that sometimes gets overlooked. Weird. Yeah.
I just want to add to that, also having people that you can like signpost to, because like Alice was saying, sometimes you don't want to do that work and you don't want to work with those people or that organization. And so being able to say, like Alice say, okay, well, this is the reason why, basically for more information, pay this organization to do some training for you, or pay me to do some training. Or if you don't want to do it, like signpost to other people, because yeah, sometimes that emotional labor is too high. It's not worth you paying me the money because the emotional labor of it is just too intense. So here are some people who could do it without that emotional labor. Thank you, goodbye.
I guess there's maybe something there that goes back to your point, Sarah, about the reasons why things cost what they do, and Vijay's point about the great usefulness of rate cards, in that's kind of often, particularly for producers, that's a language that is understood, and that's kind of a good way of communicating that without having to do a huge amount of educating. But it's I like the phrase eggy, Alice.
Just on that as well, I mean, also like rate cards are really useful and really helpful, but also they're not like the extent of just look at that and then like that's fine, because you know they're a guide. So still have a conversation with consultants that you do want to work with. And also like in terms of like, you know, that for you, if you find that that's useful, like absolutely just like look at my rate card if it's helpful for you, and if it gives you some sort of framework or structure to be able to use in your practice, like with organizations and people who potentially maybe don't pay very well or have just got a different idea of worth for disabled artists and disabled consultants, and just Well, you know, I think it's just, I can't remember who said it. It was probably either one of the panelists said, you know, it was something like, oh gosh, what was it now? No, I've got it, the brain fog. It was really important. I've just lost it. It was, it'll come back to me. It was really important though. But yeah, it's, I guess, you know, from somebody who spent many years, and I think I was talking through the journey of like my shows and how I've made my shows and stuff, and hiding a lot of that in the creative processes just because of lots of things, you know, shame, not feeling like they're going to be met, feeling like people aren't gonna, they're just going to look at it once and then just forget about it. You know, you don't want to put in all of that work and feel like it isn't happening. But I want to leave that point on hope that things are, and I really do hope that things are getting better. And like, and that one of the panelists were saying, or I think you both have said, is that there's so many people out there doing this work in all different regions. We're all working in all different areas. You know, if you want to work with consultants, you know, there's many in like Greater Manchester, and then you want to work in like Southeast or London or wherever you're working, it's like get out, access consultants who work in those regions. And, you know, if you're in a region to a venue, then, you know, that is definitely gives you worth to work in those areas, work with the organizations, make them more accessible, but they must pay you. Otherwise, that is what contributes to us getting burnt out and the survival strategy that we always have to keep going on and keep hustling for more money, or keep, you know, saying, actually, could you just up this by another £150, please? You haven't got any access costs in there. I think this thing that you were saying, Sarah, about the handbook is a really good point. If you look at their accessibility website, just see what's on their website or whatever's there. If there isn't anything, it, you know, can bring up a big kind of like, you know, alarm bells. And I think it's protecting your energy around those things. Who's going to fill your, you know, work and your time up, you know, where are you getting the most out of it? I think not just financially, but just in yourself and through your practice and your growth, what you're going to learn most.
Thank you, Vijay. Would you mind, Vijay, really briefly for a couple of folks in the chat, just explaining what rate cards are? Because a couple of people just haven't heard the term. Thank you so much.
A rate card essentially is like a breakdown of my like list of services and the cost attached to them. So it would be like, you know, I would give a brief overview of my role. So if it was like access consultancy, I would say I'm an access consultant and work in these areas, like, you know, on shows and with organizations, and break that down in a kind of paragraph. And then I'll just step through each of the things, what my 1 hourly rate is, what my half day rate is, what my full day rate is. And like lots of thinking has to go into it, because I'm like, if it's an hour rate, I'm not going to travel for that, because that actually is like 3 hours if you ask me to travel like there, and then like factoring in all of the other things around that as well. So it allows you to step into detail with all of the things, where it's like, I can only do this for this, you know, in the same way, I guess your access rider can be detailed, where you can say this, this, and this. It's like there are also like rates and costs attached to my access requirements, and I'll say, you know, this does not include my access costs of this, you know, or you might want to put your access costs in there as well. But yeah, I guess it's just stepping through that so people know when they're budgeting for fundraising applications or whatever it is, they know a kind of guide of what you're working with. But yeah, that absolutely feel free to download mine if you want to just have a look, and just, you know, you can get it on my website. It's on one of the pages. I'll have to find the link.
Thank you very much. That's much appreciated by the folks in the chat that were asking. Antonio has just shared a comment that we wanted to share also from Porcelain around the conversation about access riders, just saying they're also really useful to performers that are parents or carers or have caring responsibilities, whether or not they have a disability or access needs in that sense, which is a really great point. I think, if I'm right, Antonia, we got to the end of the questions from the room.
Yeah.
Marvellous. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. for all of your wonderful presentations and the really fantastic answers to such a broad range of questions. And thank you to everyone that's been in the session and been in the virtual room for the amazing questions and prompts and thinking that you've been doing. It has been an absolute joy and a privilege to be part of this afternoon. And then, yeah, just thank you. And thank you to GM Artists Hub for putting everything together.
Oh, thank you, Kate. And just to echo, thank you so much, Alice, Sarah, Vijay, for, as I say, being so generous with your experiences. And thank you so much, Kate, for chairing the conversation so brilliantly. What a joy. Thank you. Just a couple of things before we close. It would be remiss of me with my Lowry hat on not to mention that Alice has got a couple of events coming up at the Lowry which might be of interest for you. So I'm just going to put the links in the chat. But on the 20th of April, Alice is going to be running a free workshop for us called Finding Your Creative Access Footprint. So for anyone who'd like a bit more of a hands-on practical understanding of how to look at audio description or creative captioning, then come along and be part of that session. And then, as Alice mentioned earlier, the show Past Life is coming to the Lowry on the 4th of May. So you get the chance to get a bit of insight into Alice's process and then to come and see the show as well. So there we go. Sorry, Alice, my little plug there.
No, it was good. Well done. I forgot about the workshop, but it's going to be great. I didn't forget about it. I just forgot to mention it earlier. Well done. Well done, Anthony. Chill up now.
And of course, you know, please do check out the work that Vijay's doing, that Sarah and Art with Heart are doing, and obviously Factory International. What a great program! So there we go, Kate, with MIF coming up in the summer. Just to also mention, and John's just put this in the chat, we're doing another online workshop called Considering the Environment in Your Work, which is going to be on the 26th of April, a very similar format to this, with artists who make work about climate change, but also embed that within their practice as well. And we've got some great speakers and companies who are going to come and share their insight, and let's open up the conversation as that about that as well. And I think that is everything from us. John, is there anything I've missed, or are you? No, okay, thank you. Sorry not to put you on the spot there. But yeah, so just to say thank you so much again to all our panel. What a wonderful conversation. And thank you to you, our audience, for being so engaged and for asking such insightful and thoughtful questions. And we hope you've had we hope you've enjoyed the session this afternoon, and see you at another event. Take care. Thank you.